Explained by the Billy Meier contacts, Mario Bertossi.
Contact Report 038.
Mario Bertossi, Germany. His contact with extraterrestrials was purely technological and lasted only a fraction of a second.
Contact Report 051.
My first question is about Mario Bertossi, whom you told me was a real contact person. Can you give me more detailed information about him regarding his contact, its value and the connections, etc.?
Sure, but these things are not very pleasant.
Then why did you name him to me as a contact person?
Because he actually had a technical contact, but it was in the range of seconds.
Then please give me more information.
This Mario Bertossi is a rather unpleasant person in terms of exploring and spreading the truth, which you will see from my explanations. For years, he has been concerned with matters of frontier and spiritual science-based ideas, of which in reality he has no knowledge at all. His consciousness-based as well as his spiritual level is still so low that he has not yet been able to grasp even the most minimal basic knowledge of the spiritual teaching. Unknowingly, however, he unleashed completely uncontrollable powers onto himself, forcing a certain form of being to transmit a short message to him. It was a message concerning a disease of the human being on the earth. However, Mario Bertossi completely misinterpreted this message because his statements regarding the information he received were very flawed in their accuracy. But since he does not have the ability of a clear consciousness understanding as well as no logic, it is not surprising that he was not able to interpret the message correctly, which is why his statements are completely worthless. In addition, the data was transmitted to him in a technical impulse telepathic form. Thus, he was not able to recognize that it was a technical impulse telepathic transmission form at all. Neither were his employees. His assumption was that his statements originated from his own ability to think, which he nevertheless deliberately misrepresented as telepathic transmissions of foreign intelligences. But since the technical impulse telepathic transmission had actually taken place through his coercion, and a few of his statements are of importance, one must accept him as a real contact person. Very regrettable for this person is the fact that, as a completely ignorant life form, he was able to compel alien intelligences, which, however, do not belong to us, to a transmission. Equally unfortunate is the fact that Mario Bertossi is very selfish and lacks any ability to think logically. This is also the reason why he tries to drag all true contacts into the mud and trample on all truth, which you may have noticed. He is a person who does not accept any logical speech or opinion of another person because he is unable to grasp logic at all. He believes he is greater than he really is. The truth, however, is that he does not possess any valuable knowledge and only promotes pure fantasy creations of his own design. In other words, this means that he is completely uneducated in spiritual matters and the teaching of the spirit itself, and truly does not have the slightest knowledge. All his statements concerning alleged spiritual values and concerns are just as much fantasies of his own making as his alleged evidence, with which he tries to influence his environment at every opportunity and assumes that it will be intimidated by this stupidity. If it were not for the fact that he was forced into a short contact, which he did not really recognize, I would simply call him a charlatan and cheater from my side. Since the forced contact actually took place, however, I unfortunately cannot do this, because this contact fact remains, because he does not simply lie about it, but presumably names a few facts correctly, although he has no knowledge of the truth of the technical impulse telepathic contact.
You speak a very hard language for this man. But when I think about your words, I really have to agree with you. because we received similar impressions when we were with him on the 21st of April. My impression was that the man has no knowledge of spiritual values and concerns, and that he only wants to show off in order to be a great man.
You have observed very closely. It is also advisable to keep away from this person because he works against the truth in every manner. The man is a person who is rightly called a know-it-all. He holds no mentionable value for you or any other person. It would therefore also be of value if you would convey this message to him. It is also important that you spread the word about these things, because Mario Bertossi's dishonest machinations are likely to mislead a larger circle of persons again, even though people have already come close to the path of the truth.
You are talking about him, Hans Jacob being of low intelligence. What form should I understand by this?
The consciousness-based and rational-based, as is also the case with Mario Bertossi. I hope, by the way, that you stick to my wish not to get involved with him anymore, because before you can do that again, he has to overcome hard teachings and change his forms of observation.
You can rest assured that I have followed it and will continue to do so. I have a letter here from Mario Bertossi, which you should read.
If that is your wish, these lines are quite lowly intelligent and even primitive. They correspond entirely to the lower conscious-based level of this person, still very low-standing and even underdeveloped. You should not try to answer those lines. It should be enough if you send him a copy of my statements about him without a personal response. This would be unnecessary work for you, for this person is too taken up with himself and his charlatan and foolish imaginations to accept teaching words from you or any other person.
Whatever you say. Do you not find that you are going very hard on him?
On the contrary, I should use an even harder language. You are far too mediatory in these particular cases, which is why I have to take the floor. It is all about much more than just uncontrollable fanaticism, megalomania, and the fraudulent charlatanry of some ignorant elements. But the same goes for Mario Bertossi, who also believes himself to be called to higher things, but who is not even able to give advice of the slightest importance to those of your group, who will still come to you in some time completely ignorant in spiritual matters.
Contact Report 053.
But under no circumstances should their understanding be respected, for they are the false prophets of the New Age who do not accept truth, accuse it of being a lie, and make lying assertions that they have attained their knowledge by mental transmissions from higher levels. And these kind of prophets are unfortunately many, especially at the present time when they are making a bad impression, even wanting to force contacts from other levels and lyingly deceive their masses of followers, consciously trying to kill every truth by malicious lies and slander, as well as certain elements of the lowest form trying to undermine and destroy our task by accusing us of lies and falsehood. They go so far as to falsely claim that they have received this through telepathic information from higher life forms as truth, although they themselves are not capable of any form of telepathy and do not possess the least knowledge of spiritual and consciousness-based concerns and their modes of action, such as the two forms, humans, Mario Bertossi and Michael Arends, which boast untrue telepathic abilities and a spiritual knowledge, but which truthfully only consciously use them for charlatanry and deception.
You are a very rough shot, Simyase. Actually, I didn't want to tell you anything about it, but now you have come to talk about it yourself. Mr. Arends has written a letter to me with many questions, including whether he has telepathic abilities for which I should ask you. Mr. Bertossi also wrote a letter to me, so dirty and primitive that I do not want to tell you the content. But also Mr. Arends accuses you of lying and so on. On Pata's advice, The 2 letters are not published because their contents are so unpleasant, nasty, and primitive that they should not be imposed on the readers. The same applies to later writings by Messrs. Bertossi and Arends, who started a wild campaign against the Pleiaren and Billy.
You should not get upset about it, because especially this Bertossi is a very unworthy worm, and his spiritual knowledge is less than that of a child. He is probably a halfway good professional, but he cannot call more abilities of his own. But he has no more telepathic abilities than Arends, although he boasts such abilities as well. But everything is just lies, fraud, and self-deception. We are also aware of his slander, which he directs against us in a rather primitive form, but we do not want to concern ourselves with such primitive matters. These 2 men, who are close friends, are too unworthy, too dishonest, and too truth-negating to be taught any better. You should therefore not continue to seek and care about them. Both are no more than 2 evil false prophets of the new age, megalomaniac and characterized by rare stupidity. Both men are at a very low level of spiritual and consciousness-based development, which is only slightly higher than that of their old personalities in their previous lives. They, that is to say, their old personalities, did not lead an enjoyable life, and since then they have only made very little progress in their development with their new personalities. Their stay in otherworldly realms was very short. Consequently, they still carry parts of their former personality within them, because their overall consciousness block incarnated again too early, and they withdrew too much old information from the memory banks.
You are very meager with your information. But if I am not mistaken about your just-made statement, then it actually means that both vegetate in a very low consciousness-based standing without a complete personality change, because otherwise their new personality birth would not have taken place so quickly. Am I right?
Sure, it is, and everything is very unpleasant about them. The old personalities of Mario Bertossi and Michael Arends were already close friends with equal ambitions at the time of their former lives, despite a great age difference. The former personality of Mario Bertossi bore the name August Wilhelm in that earlier life and was born in 1867. Michael Arends' personality at that time was a man named Albert Zeton, who had learned the profession of a hairdresser, and so Albert Zeton was a hairdresser, and at the same time an innkeeper in his own restaurant, which he owned in Germany in a place called Elberfeld in the Rhineland. Albert Zeton had been married since 1871 to a woman named Maria Herkel, with whom he had several children, but of whom only 2 daughters lived in 1883. The reason I am mentioning this year is because what you are about to hear was very important in the lives of the Bertossi and Arends personalities at that time. Wilhelm Bertossi moved into the house of Zeton Arends as an apprentice hairdresser, and there the misfortune began. Zeton Arends was of a vicious, brutal, and irascible nature, struck his wife Maria and the children with severe beatings, was an alcoholic and adulterer, and of a sloppy nature. So he had also a still unmarried mistress named Alberts in Cologne, where he often stayed only for the purpose of lustful sexual satisfaction. Thus, for days he was away from home, where he left the family to their evil fate and put the apprentice Wilhelm Bertossi as his representative over his family. The young man, Wilhelm Bertossi, who was just as devoted as his superior to drunkenness, fornication, brutality, and irascibleness, soon became his bosom friend, who enjoyed his fullest trust. Thus came what had to come. One day in 1883, Zeton Arends went back to his mistress in Cologne, while Wilhelm Bertossi played himself up as deputy head of the family. Having long since been tired of the only supervising role, He had for quite some time been thinking about the rather foreman's pretty wife Maria, for whom he had sexual desires in spite of his young age. On this evil day now, the cravings of his sexual desires overwhelmed him, and he committed the deed. With persuasion and violence, he tried to persuade the woman Maria to have sexual intercourse, but the woman also resisted with violence, so Wilhelm Bertossi in a matter of minutes glowed with a furious rage and seized a heavy hammer, which he struck brutally on the woman's skull. Overflowing with blood, she collapsed and lay on the ground, unconscious and slowly passing away to death. The man Wilhelm Bertossi now, at that time was only 16 years old, hit the completely defenseless woman several more times with his bare fists, in order to tear up her skirt and trouser dresses and sexually rape her. Afterwards, he simply left the life-threateningly injured and desecrated woman lying and sneaked into his chamber, where he lay down unscrupulously and soon fell asleep. A short time later, his friend and foreman Zeton Ahrens came home and found his slowly dying wife lying there covered in blood. He immediately thought of Wilhelm Bertossi, who alone could have been responsible for this infamous act. But before he could catch him, Zeton Ahrens was arrested and incarcerated by the police, after which he was later blamed for the death of his wife. For this he was found guilty and sentenced to death by a court hearing in Elberfeld from the 28th of January, 1884 to the 2nd of February, 1884, after which the two former friends with the great age difference had meanwhile become mortal enemies, because the young Wilhelm Bertossi denied any guilt and accused Zeton Ahrens of the murder and rape of Zeton's wife Maria Herkel. Due to certain circumstances, the death penalty on Zeton Ahrens was not carried out after all, thus he spent the rest of his life in a dungeon. But the real murderer, Wilhelm de Bertossi, made a confession 4 years later, which did not help the imprisoned Zeton Ahrens at all, because he was not set free again and remained imprisoned until the end of his life. He died after approximately 25 years in the dungeon. Wilhelm Bertossi, the real murderer of Maria Herkel, unfortunately suffered an inextricable confusion during my investigations, so that after his confession I am unable to show any further data and information about him. But it should suffice what I have otherwise learned about their lives as other personalities at that time. And as I have already mentioned, the two men, Bertossi and Ahrens, have not made any significant spiritual or consciousness-based progress with their personalities since then in their last life, and still live today in discouraging forms corresponding to the time and life of that time. Their negative concerns are only minimally better than in their former lives, and they are still lying just like their personalities before them.
Contact Report 060 Kohan. If you hear at a later time such names as Zilla, Menger, Miller and Nelson or Castillo, Syracusa, Schmidt, Bertossi, Renault and Villanueva or Clara later on, then you can be sure that these are definitely the names of frauds. Contact Report 062.
Earth humans have a very hard time breaking away from their religious or semi-religious and other heresies. With open eyes, they run into their ruin and believe the swindlers and deceivers, like false prophets like Mario Bertossi and Hans Jacob, who help Bertossi and Reitz in the address delivery service.
Contact Report 063.
But the gentlemen Ahrens and Bertossi will be green and blue with anger. I just find it quite squalid that especially these two poor jerks have to drag you into the dirt and claim that you want to capture and subjugate the earth.
This assertion must testify to the truly boundless stupidity and primitiveness of these two men, for if we had ever had such actions in our minds, We would have realized such plans long ago, when Earthlings had no defensive weapons. On the other hand, even today's still very primitive weapons would not frighten us, thus there would be no obstacles to overcome. So why should we wait into the distant future if we wanted to conquer the Earth? Only very ill and still quite stupidly primitive brains are therefore able to hatch such nonsense, but not a brain that is already subject to intellectually based rationality. And those who believe such irrational, lying, and dirty lies are not much better off either.
That is hard, because people do not know that the two of them are lying through their teeth.
This is not quite as you say, because if those people would think rationally, then their way would lead to you, because they could convince themselves of the opposite of the lying Ahrens and Bertossi assertions on the basis of our contact reports.